He was lying in bed, hooked up to machines, breathing with difficulty when he asked to see me. Dad said, "You'll never be anyone. You'll never achieve anything." Those were the last words he ever spoke to me while he was alive. 2 days later he died. And I won the lottery. But wait. It wasn't quite like that. Let me tell you the real story. My name is Sophie, and at 45, I'm standing in front of a mansion that has 15 bedrooms, an ocean view, a heated pool, and a private movie theater. I'm holding the deed. Signed. Vowed. Right. But this isn't a story about a simple inheritance. This isn't a story about getting money from your father when he dies. This is a story about what you do when your father spends your whole life telling you you're a failure, when you finally prove him wrong, and when the truth that emerges after he dies is so disturbing it questions everything you thought you knew about him. Let's go back in time. Let's start from the place where everything began to fall apart. I grew up in a small apartment in a part of town nobody wanted to be in. My father, Robert, was a bitter man. He had worked in an office for 30 years, always waiting for a promotion that never came. My mother died when I was 12, and after that my father, well, he changed. He became harder, more critical, especially with me. My father had this way of looking at you as if you were a disappointment, as if you were born wrong. Whenever I brought home a good report card, he'd say, "Grades mean nothing in the real world." When I got into university on a scholarship, he said, "Good luck with that useless education." When I started working as a financial consultant at 25, he said, "You're going to fail. People like you don't achieve real success. People like me." He never explained what he meant by that. I spent 20 years trying to prove him wrong. I worked 80 hours a week. I built my own investment consulting business. I earned respect in my field. I built a network of wealthy and influential clients who trusted me with absurd amounts of money. But every time I visited my father, every time I showed him my latest successful project, every time I shared a victory, he had the same response: "It won't last. People like you aren't made for real success." What was real success? He never said. At 45, I was financially independent. I had solid investments. I had Fortune 500 clients. I had a life many people dreamed of. But I still felt like that little girl in the small apartment, waiting for my father to finally be proud of me. When I got the call that my father was in the hospital, I dropped everything. He'd had a heart attack. The doctor said he had weeks, maybe days. I went to see him every night for a week. He was asleep most of the time, but when he woke up, he'd look at me with that same contempt. "You still here?" he'd ask, as if my presence bothered him. 3 nights before he died, he woke up fully alert. His eyes were focused on me in a way they hadn't been in years. He reached for the remote and turned off the television. "He wants to talk. Something important." "Sophie," he said, his voice hoarse from the throat cancer he had kept secret from me until 3 months prior, "there's something you need to know." I moved closer. Finally. After 45 years, my father was going to say something that mattered. He was going to say he was proud. He was going to say he'd been wrong all this time. "I always knew you'd be someone," he continued, his breath ragged. "Ever since you were little. I saw a strength in you that I never had. An ability to not give up when people like me just quit." Tears were streaming down my face. Finally. "Then why?" I asked. "Why did you never tell me? Why did you always make me feel like a failure?" My father turned his head to the side. He just turned away. And then, in a voice so low I had to lean in to hear, "Because I needed you to hate the man I am. Because I needed you to build a life different from mine. A real life. Not for love, not for approval. But out of defiance. Out of anger. Out of a burning need to prove to yourself that you were capable of more than the rest of your family." Something inside me broke in that moment. "You hurt me on purpose?" I asked. "You made me spend 45 years feeling inferior on purpose?" "Yes," he said. No remorse. No justification. Just a simple yes. "And now that I've proven I can succeed." My father closed his eyes. He was silent for so long I thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, without opening his eyes, he said, "You'll never be anyone." I left the room. I went into the hospital hallway. I cried. 2 nights later my father died. The last words he said to me were, "You'll never be anyone." If you're as shocked as I was in that moment, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Stories about complex family relationships, about pain and rejection, are hard to hear. But they need to be heard. And we need your support to keep sharing these real stories. And in the comments, tell me, where are you watching from? Write your city and country. I love knowing that these experiences touch people in so many different parts of the world. Now let's get to what happened after the funeral. The will was read a week after the funeral. I expected to find little. My father was a simple man. The apartment where he lived, maybe some savings, old watches he collected. But Dr. Harrison, the lawyer, said something that froze me. Your father left a property to you. A very valuable property. What property? I asked. My father lived in that same old apartment. No, Dr. Harrison said. He also owned a property on the coast. A mansion. Which he bought 15 years ago. Which you apparently didn't know existed. A silence fell over the room. Was he joking? My father, who constantly complained about not having money, who always asked to borrow from me to pay bills, who lived in that decrepit downtown apartment, had owned a mansion? There's more, Dr. Harrison continued. Your father left a sealed chest for you. With instructions that you should only open it when you are at the property. Alone. Within a week, I was driving to the address Dr. Harrison had given me. It was a private coastal street, surrounded by other luxury homes. The gate was automatic and accepted the code that was in the envelope the lawyer gave me. And I saw the house. It was white, modern, but with touches of classic elegance. 3 stories. Giant windows overlooking the ocean. A well-manicured garden. A garage that could probably fit 5 cars. An infinity pool with blue mosaics. All of it signed over. Mine. I took the keys that were in the envelope. I entered the house. The interior was surprising. It wasn't an interior my father would have chosen. This didn't bear his personality's mark. It was elegant, modern, with designer furniture. With art on the walls. With everything perfectly arranged, as if someone had cared deeply about every detail. There was a chest in the study. Dark wood with iron handles. Small enough to fit in a closet but heavy when I tried to move it. I opened it with the key from the envelope. Inside were millions. I'm not exaggerating. Bonds. Stocks. Cryptocurrencies. Property deeds for real estate I never knew my father owned. A fake passport with his name but a different man's face. A letter. The letter was in a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting. Writing. Sophie. If you're reading this, it means you've finally entered the house. The house I bought for you 15 years ago. The house you never knew was yours. You're wondering why I was so cruel to you. Why I spent my whole life telling you that you would never be anyone. Why I deliberately tried to destroy your confidence when you were young. The truth is complicated. And it will destroy everything you think you know about me. But you deserve to know. I was a criminal, Sophie. Not a petty criminal. A major one. The kind of criminal who works with governments and intelligence agencies. I made most of this fortune by stealing. From banks. From corporations. From cartels. I worked for dangerous people. I did horrible things so I could have this life. When you were born, something changed in me. I looked at you in your mother's arms, and suddenly I didn't want you to have this life. I didn't want you to know where the money came from. I didn't want you to be like me. But I knew that if I just gave you money, if I told you that you were special, if I allowed you to inherit the criminal life I had built, you would end up like I did. Full of remorse. A life lived in the shadows. So I did something terrible. I decided I would become your enemy. That I would spend my whole life telling you that you were a failure. That you would never be anyone. Because I knew you were someone who would respond to rejection with determination. You were someone who would do anything to prove me wrong. And you did. You built an honest life. A life you can be proud of. A life that is true. This house, this money, these investments, it's all yours now. But more important than that is knowing that you didn't build your wealth the way I built mine. You didn't sacrifice your soul to achieve success. There is information in this chest that you can use. If you wish. There are details of offshore bank accounts. There is information about my contacts. There are names of people who worked with me. I have asked someone I trust to deliver this information to the investigators as soon as you open this chest. I'm finally tired. I'm tired of living in the shadows. And I want you to know it's not because of guilt. It's because I finally created someone who is better than me. Someone worthy of inheriting. You'll never be anyone, Sophie. You already are someone. With the conflicted love of a father who failed. Robert. My whole body trembled. My father was a criminal. My father had stolen. My father had deliberately emotionally abused me to keep me away from his criminal life. And he had turned himself in to the authorities. If you are as disturbed as I am, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And in the comments tell me, what kind of relationship do you have with your family? Do you understand now why some parents are cruel? Where are you watching from? Write your city and country. I'm curious to know where these stories reach. Because now comes the most complicated part. Discovering the truth about my father. I called Dr. Harrison. He confirmed everything. 3 hours after my father died, he had delivered a flood of documents to federal investigators. Names, dates, operations, everything they needed to dismantle an international criminal network. My father had been a key figure. Not just a thief, a strategist. Someone who had planned and executed heists that affected governments. The federal police looked for him at the hospital. But he was already dead. So they looked for his assets. And they found me. It took weeks of interrogations. I had to prove I wasn't an accomplice. That I knew nothing about my father's criminal activities. That I had built my success completely independently of him. They finally believed me. Because financial records showed that every penny I earned came from my work. No deposits from my father. No bank transfers. Nothing. During the process, I discovered the extent of my father's crimes. He had stolen approximately $500 million over his career. He had worked for intelligence agencies of multiple countries. He had infiltrated banks, tech companies, government organizations. And he had done all this while living in that decrepit apartment, driving a 20-year-old car, borrowing money to pay bills. The fortune he had accumulated, the one in the chest, was just a fraction of what he had actually stolen. Most of it had been recovered by governments. Some of it had been donated to the victims of his crimes. Some had disappeared into accounts that even the federal agencies couldn't trace. But what was left, about $50 million, was legally mine. Because my father had made a legal transfer to my name 2 days before he died. A document that was signed and notarized. A document that stated he wanted me to have this inheritance, and that the police couldn't touch it. It took months of legal battles, but finally the investigators agreed. The money was mine. We moved into the mansion on the 1st of August, on the first sunny morning after the whole legal storm had passed. I drove there alone. I parked in the garage. I entered the house. Then I collapsed. I cried. Not out of joy. Not out of relief. But out of confusion. Out of anger. Out of sadness for a lifetime of rejection that I now understood had a purpose, but that still hurt. Over the next few months, I slowly began to process everything. I saw a therapist. One who specialized in family trauma. One who had experience with people whose lives had been turned upside down. The therapist helped me understand that my father had done something noble and something terrible at the same time. He had protected me from a criminal life. But he had done so by emotionally abusing me. Those two facts could be true simultaneously. And I could forgive one and still be hurt by the other. 6 months after my father died, I received a call from a man who identified himself as a special investigator for the federal agency. He said he had information I should know. During the years my father worked as a criminal, he had witnessed something. A crime. A crime my father had never reported. A crime that had killed 3 people. The investigator asked if I wanted to know more. If I wanted to know what my father had done. Or rather, what my father had not done. I said I wanted to know. The investigator told me. My father had been hired 30 years ago to help steal diamonds from a secure warehouse. There was a 4th team member whom my father didn't know well. This man had disappeared. And the police had found 3 bodies in a landfill. The police had never been able to connect the man's disappearance with the bodies. But confidential documents my father had given to the federal investigators included information that identified the killer. Someone on my father's own team. Someone who had killed his partners to steal more of the profit share. My father had witnessed parts of the crime. But he hadn't reported it back then. Because my father was a criminal. Because he believed it was not his business. Now 30 years later, thanks to the information my father provided before he died, the killer had been identified and was being prosecuted. Your father, the investigator said, at the end of his life, made some efforts to right what he could. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't enough. But it was something. If you are as stunned as I am by this whole story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And in the comments tell me, Do you think my father deserved forgiveness? Do you think he did the right thing by emotionally abusing me? Where are you watching from? Write your city and country. Because now comes the conclusion of this disturbing and transformative story. A year after my father died, I was standing on a stage. For the first time, I was publicly sharing the story of who my father was. Not in a private panel. Not in a therapy session. But on a podcast. Recorded and available for the whole world to hear. I had decided there was no reason to hide it. That the life my father lived was not my responsibility to conceal. That the way he treated me was not my responsibility to protect. The reaction was complicated. Some people told me I should be grateful to my father for keeping me out of the criminal world. That his cruelty was actually protection. Other people told me my father was a monster who redeemed himself too late. That no amount of information provided to investigators could make up for a life of crime. Some people told me I should refuse the inheritance. That the money was dirty. That I should donate it all to charity and start from scratch. But I didn't refuse it. I donated half of the inheritance to the families of my father's victims. To the people he had harmed. To institutions that fight organized crime. And I kept the other half. Because I decided that refusing it all wasn't about moral honesty. It was about self-punishment. It was about blaming myself for being the daughter of a criminal man. And I wasn't going to do that. I donated the mansion to a university. They turned it into a dormitory for students who had no financial resources. A place where young people like me, young people who came from complicated and dysfunctional families, could live and study. I kept the investments. Some of them. Enough to ensure I would never have to work again if I didn't want to. Enough to be generous to the people I loved. Enough to create a scholarship fund for children whose parents were in prison. 2 years after my father died, I received a letter. It was from the man whose crime my father had witnessed. The killer. He was writing from prison. He was serving a life sentence. In the letter, he apologized for the things he had done. He said he had spent years hating the fact that my father had finally turned him in. But now, in prison, he had time to think. And he understood that my father had finally done the right thing. The letter ended, "Your father saved me from my own life. He gave me consequences. He gave me a chance to really understand who I was. Tell your father, tell his ghost, that I finally understand. And that I am grateful." I cried when I read that. Because it meant that my father's last action, the most important action of his life, had meant something. It hadn't fully redeemed who he was. But it had brought justice. It had brought peace to the families of the victims. It had transformed a man in prison. Today, 5 years after my father died, I am walking through a life that is completely different from the one I knew. Not because I'm rich now. I was always financially successful, even before the inheritance. But because now I understand that my father made a choice. A terrible choice at the beginning of his life. The choice to become a criminal. But at the end of his life, a different choice. The choice to stop. The choice to protect his daughter. The choice to tell the truth. I've started a mentoring program for young people whose parents are in prison. I use my story to show them that they are not defined by their parents' crimes. That they can build lives that are not based on secrets or shame. Sometimes, when I'm in my office, surrounded by the same consultants and employees who worked for me before I inherited anything from my father, I think of him. I think about how he spent 45 years wanting me to hate the man he was. Because he knew the life he lived was empty. Because he knew that easy money came with a price that couldn't be paid with money. I think about how he deliberately emotionally abused me. And how strangely I am grateful. Because that abuse made me someone who could stand on her own. Someone who could succeed without external validation. Someone who could build a real life. My father said I would never be anyone. And he was right. I am not anyone. Because anyone is someone that others have built. Someone who inherited a legacy. Someone who lived according to their parents' instructions. I am someone who built my own life. Someone who faced rejection and chose determination. Someone who discovered my father was a criminal and chose not to be defined by it. I am Sophie. And this is my story. Folks, if you've made it this far on this emotional journey of a daughter and her criminal father, of secrets and redemption, of abuse and final understanding, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Sharing this has been deeply personal, even though it's a story that was created to explore real themes of family, identity, crime, and forgiveness. If this story touched you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Share it with people you think need to hear about resilience, about overcoming rejection, about not being defined by the actions of your parents. And in the comments tell me, can you understand why my father did what he did? Do you think he deserved forgiveness? Or do you think nothing he did could make up for a criminal life? Also write your city and country. I want to know where this story reached. It's always exciting to find out. I want to know if this story about late redemption, about complicated parents, and about building your own identity has reached you, wherever you are in the world. And always remember, you are not responsible for your parents' crimes. You are not defined by the rejection you received. You are defined by the choices you make now. Today. In this very moment. The choice to be someone. To be true. To be free.